Lizard's Brain by Richard L. Elsliger. This was my 5th trip to Myanmar in Burma. All of my previous trips I deemed as failures. Yes, I found amber deposits and even a few impressive prehistoric insects entrapped in solid amber pieces, but I needed a higher life form to carry on the experiment if it was ever to work. During this trip, I found the most remarkable sample when I branched away from the guide. I left the group behind momentarily to explore a rocky outcrop in the distance, leaving the others to their own trivial diversions. They'd not noticed my absence, and this freed me to check for choice material. I spotted the incredible find by happenstance. The position of the sun, combined with my presence in that certain spot at that exact moment, coalesced to allow me to perceive the slightest glimmer of amber partially exposed to the elements. The specimen might easily have been overlooked, but for the fortuity of my circumstances and timing. I moved quickly with the geological hammer and broke away enough of the matrix to loosen the surrounding rock, wondering with intense curiosity what I might find inside the amber. When the piece dropped into my hand, I spotted a lizard entrapped deep inside the dull amber piece. I saw someone from the group headed my way, so I stuffed the sample in my sample bag with haste and adjusted my attitude to conceal the elation of my discovery. One of the tourists came over and asked if I'd had any luck, to which I responded in the negative. We wound up the excursion and headed to the bus shortly thereafter. I maintained general talk with the tour guide and a few tourists on the way to the hotel, and once there, I retired to my room to take a closer look at this startling reveal, safely ensconced within the geological sample bag. To find a reptile in amber was unheard of, but to find a perfectly preserved reptile defied the astronomical odds. I believed this find would push the timetable of my experiment rapidly forward. I scrutinized the specimen in privacy, poring over the details as best I could through the murky amber rock. Further analysis and research from my hotel room confirmed this lizard to be an extinct specimen, noting no close living relatives, a one-off that had trapped itself in pine tree resin about 110 million years ago. The level of preservation astounded me, its little body fully unblemished within its solid amber crypt. The exigency of my experiment and my ardent dedication to the end goal mandated that I advance my departure date, moving the flight home to the next day. I slept without peace that night, twisting and turning with jittery thoughts of an experimental breakthrough never before seen by our civilization. When morning arrived, I gathered up my belongings and packed the amber inside a shirt and obfuscated by toiletries. At the airport, by some miracle, I managed to slither through security without suspicion, passing unimpeded by either the detectors or customs officials. I made my way home to Cambridge, England, in nervous anticipation for the experiment. At home, in my custom-built laboratory, I possessed the necessary equipment to explore this find undisturbed by needless interlopers. I performed my science in a solitary manner, unimpeded by the negative ideas of my contemporaries and colleagues. I told them nothing. I taught paleontology at Cambridge during the day and practiced my outlandish paleontological experiments by night. This would not be my first attempt. My first attempt to access a visual window into the past had partially failed and partially succeeded. The subject of that experiment consisted of the head and body of an arachnid, a hapless arthropod that found itself trapped in amber over 100 million years ago. I deemed the experiment unworkable for my needs, the memory too brief and inaccessible. I managed to coax a millisecond of scenery from its brain, but it vanished so fast as to make the picture indiscernible. The paltry glimpse into the past given by the spider proved to me the functionality of my equipment, that it indeed worked after decades of failures. The Burma lizard, perfectly preserved, sat considerably higher on the evolutionary shelf, well above that of a paltry spider. The Burma lizard would break past the short glimpse afforded by the spider, and soon the lizard would take me on a trip through prehistory. The anticipation of what it might reveal kept me tense and anxious at what I would find. I just hoped that the brain remained intact. It took a good 2 days, but I recovered from the jet lag and taught my paleontology classes during the week, retiring early from classes to adjust to the time change. I chose Friday night to remove the subject lizard from its amber prison. I used the finest instruments at my disposal to pry away the amber pieces without disturbing any of the skin or the integrity of the specimen. I chipped away at the larger chunks until I reached the thinnest layer of amber that coated the body. I removed the smallest of flecks with the utmost of care, exposing the lizard to a world not seen since the middle of the Cretaceous period. The modern-day air seemed to have had no perceptible effect on the preserved body of the creature, though I expected immediate disintegration of the skin to the shock of exposure. The tiny reptile looked as if it had been asleep, and the colors embedded in its scaly skin produced a wondrous rainbow. To imagine what this creature might have witnessed so many eons ago boggled my mind, and the prospect of capturing its last visual moments agitated and excited me. It took most of the night removing half of the amber, leaving the lower half of the lizard still encased. I retired to bed at 3 a.m, exhausted from a full day teaching and a night filled with preparation of the specimen. I dreamed unsettled thoughts, imaginings of massive dinosaurs roaming the inner chambers of my deepest fantasies. Gargantuan bipedal theropods wandered with abandon, while I watched with childlike awe. I went unnoticed by these massive monsters until one of them turned its head and saw me. It thumped and roared a deep guttural snarl, announcing an immediate onslaught, and I ran. It pursued me at tremendous speed, closing the gap between us until I could feel its breath at my back each time it huffed and snapped. I woke up in bed, folded in half, clutching my chest. I looked around for assurance that it had only been a nightmare and not a Mesozoic reality. Ever since that experiment with the amber spider, such nightmarish dreams pervaded my thoughts with incredible frequency while in deep sleep. Even in my waking hours, sometimes I saw terrible visions that flashed before my eyes with no plausible explanation. I could only believe that the first experiment caused the phenomenon, but regardless, I would not be deterred from gaining the knowledge I craved, so I pressed on. I continued my work late Saturday afternoon until I exposed the head in its entirety. The brilliance of the scales shimmered under the artificial lights. Had I not been aware of the lizard's Cretaceous demise from a period that spanned such an enormous stretch of time, I might have expected it to writhe out of the amber matrix and make good its escape. I took numerous photographs of the ancient creature, documenting the elaborate operation. I took a pause to rest my weary eyes for a minute and leaned backward in my chair, allowing my mind to wander. More visions came to the surface, imaginings of an ancient world never before seen by our modern eyes. Soon, very soon, I would see much more than these brief and intermittent glimpses. I walked to the table that supported my equipment and gave a thorough check. The electronics of my invention consisted of modern technology fused with old vacuum tubes, a synthesis of printed circuit boards that interfaced with outdated motherboards, yet the pieces functioned in unison, creating a delicate harmonic balance to achieve the end result. I took the exposed lizard to the MRI chamber and I performed an MRI of its head using a machine I had purchased from a defunct hospital. I bought the MRI undetected by the neighbors and placed it in my basement laboratory to avoid any suspicious or unwanted questions. The scan took approximately 40 minutes and gave me the result I wanted, that the brain had remained fully intact. I read the results twice to be sure, and the conclusion astounded me for an organism of such incredible age. Factors that previously weighed against the odds had suddenly turned in my favor. I took a break from my work and went upstairs to eat, thinking deeply about the experiment down below. To see the past in its entire splendor for the first time, I would need to memorialize the moment for posterity, a documentary proof revealing the incredible power of my technological breakthrough. I estimated that the memory retention of this lizard to be much greater than the spider, and my expectations remained far greater. If the machine functioned for its intended purpose, I could hope for at least a 30-second window. I finished dinner and went downstairs to plunge into the experiment. I brought the lizard out from the MRI room to the table, placing it under a bright light and positioning the head next to the equipment. I attached electrodes to its skull and then attached a halo of electrodes that encircled my own head. I rechecked all of the connections and then reclined in the chair. I reached over and flipped the switch, hearing and then feeling a mild and pleasant electrical hum that filled the room and permeated my senses. The machine began to fire long extinct neurons in the creature, recreating delicate connections lost so long ago. My mind picked up on the faintest synapses as they fired on repeat, my eyes fluttering while I sank into a semi-unconscious state. The room started to spin and I became delirious. I needed to close my eyes. The spinning increased in velocity, reaching the fervor of a tornado, and then it halted as abruptly as it had begun. Now, in my mind, I saw the most luscious forest of exquisite ancient trees I'd ever encountered, a misty jungle of strange conifers and ferns long gone from our time. The air hung thick and steamy, and I could smell the odors that this little reptile must have smelled. I saw what it saw. The interface with the long-dead brain had worked. I was back in time, and I could not believe it. I moved up the side of a tree, gripping the bark with scaly reptilian hands. I could see the sharp nails of my lizard claws digging into the bark. In the distance I could see a colossal theropod thundering its way through thick foliage, heading toward me. The thing looked massive, and when it drew nearer, I noted the distinct two-clawed hands, unquestionably a tyrannosaur, covered in drab olive-green skin. It had a plant-eater in its mouth, having snapped the neck of its victim with one fatal bite. I watched it rip chunks of flesh from the dead creature's abdomen, filling its ravenous mouth with meat and blood. As horrifying the scene, it captured me, and I did not want to leave. I moved further up the tree. The claws of my reptilian hands became immobilized, frozen in a sticky sludge, and I angled my lizard head to see the cause. The more I struggled to extricate myself, the faster it affixed my lizard body in place. More sap oozed and poured, covering my head, cutting off my ability to breathe. I wanted to wake from this stifling horror, but I did not have the code to break free. The dream repeated again, a whirlwind tornado of dizzy motion, followed by the sight of a luscious Cretaceous forest, and then the tyrannosaur ripping flesh from bone. Over and over the images played like a movie, the last 30 seconds of this lizard's life, now imprinted on my brain in a closed loop. I screamed in silence, begging to be released, but no one heard me. They found me Tuesday afternoon when I failed to show up for Monday's class. Over and over, the last 30 seconds replayed in my mind as they removed me from the basement and rushed me to the hospital. Over and over, I watched the tyrannosaur rip apart the plant-eater, while the doctor spoke about my grim prognosis, saying my brain waves were unlike anything they'd ever seen. Over and over, I wanted to shout to them, to explain what had happened, to beg them to shut the images off, but no one heard me. No one could talk to the lizard's brain, my newfound Cretaceous brain, trapped forever in a Mesozoic nightmare from which I could never awake.